Imagine that one day in your sad life you discover that your old girlfriend was murdered by a gang of criminals of which you were part of in your school years, and when they push you towards the train tracks to leave no loose ends, you travel back in time to your school days, realizing that now you can avoid her death, and for that you will have to become the biggest gangster in all of Japan. This is the story of Tokyo Revengers. The story introduces our protagonist, Takemichi Henagaki, an adult who is a loser that works at a video rental store and is not even respected by either the landlady of his apartment, which, by the way, is a pigsty, nor by his boss who is younger than him, or even by the children in his neighborhood who play heavy pranks on him. His greatest achievement in life was being the boyfriend of the beautiful Hinata Tachibana during high school, a girl who, according to the news, recently died alongside her younger brother Naoto in a freak car accident that was apparently caused by a dispute with a gang that controls the city, the Tokyo Manji. While coming back from work, Takemichi waits for the train at Shinjuku Station, just like he does every day. But when the train is about to arrive, someone pushes him to the train tracks. Remembering the beautiful Hinata and accepting that his life sucks, Takemichi dies instantly. Or not? Our protagonist opens his eyes inside the very same train that ran over him, but exactly 12 years earlier, reuniting with his high school classmates Makoto, Yamagishi, Taikuya, and Akun, the leader of the gang who, being second-year youngsters, believed themselves to be real gangsters, looking for a fight with the second-year kids of another school, and believing to be safe thanks to Masaru, Takemichi's cousin and leader of the third years. This was nothing more than a lie from Masaru to look cooler in the eyes of his younger cousin. In a rather crude scene, we can see that actually Masaru was an errand boy, while the third years give our protagonist a beating and his group. After losing this fight, Takemichi remembers that ever since this moment, they became the slaves to the third years, who on top of that were members of the Tokyo Manji, and how his life from that moment on consisted in apologizing for everything, as he saw with his landlady, with his boss, and even his children in the neighborhood. Now at nighttime, returning in defeat with his group of friends, Takemichi remembers that Hinata will die in 12 years at the hands of these group of gangsters, and goes running to see her, not being able to hold back his tears after meeting her. His girlfriend gets worried, recognizes that he's not the same as always, and lets him go. Our protagonist sits in a nearby swing to process everything while he witnesses how a kid is being bullied by people older than him, but not older than Takemichi, who, being distracted by them, attacks them, saving the child that introduces himself to Naoto, brother of Hinata. They go back to the swing together to talk about his sister, and Takemichi, thinking this was all a dream, can't help but tell about the day he will die with his sister in 12 years and asks him to protect her at all costs. Their conversation ends with a handshake that instantly transports our protagonist back to the present day. Takemichi wakes up in the infirmary of Shinjuku Station before Naoto himself, who saved him from being run over by the train, telling him that the conversation they had that night at the swing changed his fate, inspiring him to become a policeman so he would be able to save his sister. But he couldn't do it, and that's why he seeks the help of our protagonist, the time traveler. After spending a few sleepless days together to study the police files of the Toman, short for Tokyo Manji, Naoto reveals the identity of two leaders of the gang, Manjiro Sano and Tada Kisaki, and tasks him with the mission of stopping them from meeting each other 12 years in the past to save Hinata. Takemichi accepts him and they shake hands, thus transporting himself to the past once again. Our protagonist opens his eyes in the worst place, finding himself in the middle of one of the underground fights organized by the third years commanded by Kiyomasa. Due to being unprepared, he's knocked out with a single punch, and because he lost the fight, the leader orders for him to get beat up again, leaving him unconscious in the middle of the park. Then Takemichi wakes up. He asks about Kisaki and Sano, but after hearing the latter's name, Kiyomasa hits him with a baseball bat, making him lose consciousness again. Feeling like a coward that flees all the time, our protagonist runs to look for Naoto to go back to the present. But before that, he comes across Hina, who gives him the strength to continue. because he's doing all of this to save her. Once again at school, Takamichi joins his friends who sadly tell them that they have to fight again, and that today, Takuya's turn, the weakest one in the group, our protagonist, arrives right before the fight is about to start and stops it, challenging Kiyomasa to a fight. Takamichi is clearly no match for Kiyomasa, and when Akun is about to stab the leader with a knife he had in his pocket, he's impressed to see that his friend doesn't give up, even when he's getting beat up. This also grabs the attention of none other than Manjiro Sano, better known as Mikey, captain of the Toman, who appears together with Ken Raijuji, also known as Daken, sub-captain of the same gang. Everyone present pays respects to Mikey, who arrives and instantly defeats Kiyomasa, while Draken warns him to stop organizing these fights which stain the reputation of the Toman. Mikey leaves, recognizing Takamichi as his new friend and freeing our protagonist's group from Kiyomasa's slavery. The next day, Mikey and Draken break into Takamichi's school, knocking out every student they come across in order to take him away. And when they are about to leave, Hina appears and slaps Mikey in the face, wanting to protect his boyfriend from the people that always beat him up. To defend his captain, Draken grabs Hina's arm, but Takamichi threatens both of them, making them promise they won't land a finger on her. The two of them look mad, and when Mikey is about to hit our protagonist, he shows us this was all a prank and recognizes both Takamichi's and Hina's bravery. They leave school on bikes, and Mikey relieves that Takamichi caught his attention, since he reminds him of his dead older brother, thanks to his bravery and for upholding his ideals even when fighting against stronger people, and wants him to join Toman so that they may build a better future for their gang members. After spending a day studying with Hina, a hilarious scene occurs while they are watching the fireworks, in which Takamichi holds Naoto's hand instead of Hina's by accident, thus making him go back to the present. Present-day Naoto tells us that every time that Takamichi goes back to the past, his body will be asleep the same amount of time he spends in the past, so he recommends him to always do it at home so that he may take care of him. In this case, he traveled for a week. Takamichi tells Naoto how Mikey really is, and that someone like him wouldn't commit the atrocities that the Toman does today. Seeking to speak with Mikey, Takamichi meets Akun, who also became a high command of the gang and currently is the owner of a luxurious casino. He greets Takamichi like an old friend, but then the both of them are alone on a rooftop. He reveals that he was the one who pushed him onto the tracks, that he hasn't heard anything about Mikey for many years, and that everything changed the day Draken died. All of this ends with Akun realizing that Takamichi has the power to travel in time and asks him to save Hina, Draken, and himself too. After saying this, Akun jumps off the roof. Takamichi, still shocked by the death of his lifelong friend, mourns his passing and vows to himself he will save them all. Thanks to Akun, Takamichi has a new mission to save Draken, and thanks to Naoto, he gets the time and place of the event, so he goes back to the past to stop it. Now in the past, our protagonist wakes up with a woman in her underwear on top of him and runs away, bumping into Hina, but they are interrupted by a call from Draken, who tells him of a meeting in Masashi Shrine, where they will go together. After arriving, we are introduced to Draken's girlfriend, Emma, who was the woman that met him after his last time travel, because she wanted to make her boyfriend feel jealous, since he only thinks about Mikey, the Toman, and motorcycles. Hina, after hearing that he was with a woman in her underwear, hits him and leaves. The next day, Takamichi offers to be Draken's bodyguard, but he denies this request, so he simply decides to follow him around everywhere, making sure he doesn't realize. This way, he learns that Draken is always next to Mikey, containing him and fulfilling his every whim. At the end of the day, they visit the girlfriend of Pachin's friend to pay their respects, and Takamichi notices how important Draken is for the young leader of the Tokyo Manji. We learn of Draken's past. He was abandoned by his mother when he was just 2 years old, then raised in a brothel in Shibuya's red light district. We see how he got his distinctive head tattoo even while still being very young. And we learn how he met Mikey. They were both elementary school boys that earned the respect of all the older students. We see Mikey easily defeating Draken's bosses and offering his friendship. Back to the present, we see Takamichi alongside Naoto, investigating about Osanai, the old leader of Mobius who is now a humble worker. While being interrogated, he admits having nothing to do with the orders to kill Draken and says that internal conflict started after his death. With their new mission to stop Toman from fighting Mobius at all costs, Takamichi returns to the past, opening his eyes on Akun's bike. Being given a ride by him, and our protagonist is glad to see his friend alive and well. Our protagonist heads to a secret meeting between Mikey, Draken, Patchin, and Payin in an abandoned warehouse, determined to stop the fight from taking place, but only achieving to hear a refusal from the leader who had already made his decision, and more beatings from Patchin. A young Osanai, commanding a considerable group of Mobius gangsters, interrupts them. Patchin, who is no match for the leader of the rival gang, falls for Mikey's shoulder, apologizing for having lost. Then Mikey defeats Osanai with one kick, asking everyone who thought his partner lost to step forward. But suddenly, Patchin gets up unexpectedly and stabs Osanai to finally take revenge for his friend and family, and decides to turn himself into the police, which was headed to their location due to the large number of gang members present. During their escape, Takamichi passes out and wakes up in the hospital next to Emma, who tells them that Mikey argued with Draken and that Toman has split in two. The days pass, and now in his house, Takamichi is visited by his friends, who quickly deny they ever had a fight. But right in that moment, Draken arrived and confirmed it did indeed happen, and while leaving his house, he faces none other than Mikey himself, destroying many objects held dear by Takamichi. Our protagonist becomes enraged and lunges at Mikey, but his attack is dodged and he lands into the trash. Then, with tears in his eyes, he points out to them that they don't care about anything else while they fight. While he's talking, Mikey makes everyone notice that Takamichi had poop on his head because he fell on top of garbage, and everyone laughs at him. After making up, everyone plays soccer together, and then Hina arrives, supported by Emma, inviting our protagonist to go to the festival that will take place the very same day that Draken will die. But having managed to get the Toman leaders to make peace, Takamichi gladly accepts the offer, thinking that the issue was already solved. Two couples go to the festival together, Takamichi with Hina and Draken with Emma. At a certain point, it begins to rain, and our protagonist is left alone with his girlfriend. But when they're about to kiss, his friend Yamagishi interrupts him with a phone call, telling him that there were still members of Toman who held a grudge against Draken because of his fight with Mikey, and so Takamichi goes running and comes across Kiyomasa alongside the Toman loyal to him, who, still mad about losing the income from his underground fights, sought revenge. Kiyomasa's goons beat Takamichi up until he falls to the floor and they tie him up with tape. Again, he feels like a useless crybaby, and it's Hina who rescues him once more after the bullies leave, and there they have their first kiss, which gives him the strength to go on. Then Captain Mitsuha arrives on his motorbike to tell our protagonist of the real motive of the fight between the leaders, and it was because Draken was opposed to having Mikey and Toman pay for Patchin's bail, and everyone in the gang agreed except for Payin, who allied himself with some members of Mobius that sought revenge. And then they meet up with Draken and Emma while they were coming back from the festival. Takamichi remembers that Draken died in a parking lot near the festival, and they were now headed in that direction. When they arrive, they see many members of Mobius lying defeated, but even more were still left standing and fighting against Draken. When he gets tired, Mikey arrives on his characteristic motorbike, and then Hanma, temporary leader of Mobius, introduces himself. Apparently, he was behind this trap, being a worthy rival to Mikey. The rest of Toman arrive. The remaining captains are introduced and a street fight breaks out. Mikey interrupts the fight to make Payin see he was also in the wrong for leaving Patchin in prison, and they make peace. Meanwhile, Takamichi looks for Draken amongst the crowd, seeing Kayomasa with a bloodied knife and Draken on the floor. While the fight between Mikey and Hanma goes on, the leader asks Takamichi to help his friend and he carries him away, even though he's double his size. On the way, he meets Hina and Emma, who immediately call an ambulance, but right at that moment, Kiyomasa arrives with his men, and Draken, being unable to get up, encourages Takamichi alongside Hina and Emma so that he may face his rival. Takamichi manages to knock Kiyomasa out in his own way, but not before being stabbed in the hand and right when his underlinings were about to strike. Takamichi's friends, commanded by Akun, arrive to help in the fight. With our protagonist's will, his friends manage to play for time until the police arrive along with an ambulance for Draken. Mobius retires and Hanma tells Mikey that he's about to witness the birth of the biggest gang in the region, Valhalla, which would arrive to make matters more difficult for Toman. On the way to the hospital in the ambulance, Draken suffers a heart attack, and once in the waiting room where everyone is located, we are informed that Drake has survived. Pain feels guilty for everything that he caused and betraying his own friends, and Mitsuya tells him that Draken was the only one that went to visit Pachin every day without fail. Pain cries while Mitsuya welcomes him back to Toman, while Mikey bursts into tears of joy after learning that his friend will recover. A few days later, Takamichi goes to the hospital feeling very proud of himself for being the one that stopped the fight, and Draken gifts him the Toman uniform that belonged to Mikey for having saved the gang. On the rooftop, Mikey wonders why Hanma wanted to cause that conflict, why he urged Kayomasa to kill Draken, and lastly, how did Takamichi know all of this and attempt to stop it? Our protagonist leaves the hospital and heads to Hina's house to say goodbye to her, but not before gifting her a collar of a 4-leaf clover, and thinking that his mission was over, he shakes Naoto's hand to go back to the present. He regains consciousness in the video rental store where he worked at, he was previously fired, without Detective Naoto's number in his cell phone and finding a scar on his hand from the last fight. Takamichi receives a reminder from the barbershop and goes there, bursting into tears when he finds Akun, who he managed to save and is now fulfilling his dream of being a stylist, along with Takamichi's promise of being his first client. In that moment, he's called by Naoto, who tells him he's looking for him to visit his sister. After arriving, Takamichi wonders if Hina still remembers him, and, being afraid of what Hina may or may not feel, Takamichi decides to leave the building, bumping into her at the door and instantly beginning to cry after seeing that she's still using the collar with the clover he gave her. Because of the awkward situation of reuniting after so many years, Naoto takes the initiative and takes them for a ride, but he leaves them alone in the car because of an emergency. Hina takes Takamichi to the park where they broke up and asks him why he did it, and Takamichi, not knowing what to answer, just avoids the question and goes to the bathroom. Here, he finally decides to propose to her, and while leaving the bathroom, he bumps into none other than Hanma himself, and sadly understanding the situation, goes running to the car where his beloved was waiting, and sees how Akun's car crashes against Hina's. Akun's last words were the same as before, and after not being able to save Hina because of her being badly injured, he simply declares his love, and in the last moment she pushes him away to save his life. Because the car exploded. In this moment, being filled with rage and sorrow, Takamichi decides to become the leader of the Toman. At Hina's wake, Takamichi stays strong, but even so, he cannot stop the tears from flowing, and after knowing all the efforts they made to stop this, Naoto breaks down in tears. Hina's mother gives him her daughter's collar that he himself gifted to her. Naoto tells us that Aiken did this because apparently the Toman kidnapped his family and they threatened him. Now that they saved Draken, they think about looking for him, but he was in prison and sentenced to death for committing a murder. Draken shows us he's still the same as always. He doesn't regret his life. He only followed the orders of Kisaki, who he regrets not having killed. Apparently, Kisaki admired Mikey so much, he ended up hating him and wanted to take everything away from him. The time of the visit runs out, and Takemichi was the new mission of climbing up the Toman ranks until becoming its leader, and so he returns to the past, arriving in a day where he's in a hot spring with Draken and Mikey enjoying their happier days. Once again in a Toman meeting, Mikey announces the captain that will replace Pachin will be an ex-Mobius, Kisaki Teda. Takemichi, knowing he will be responsible for the deaths of his friends in the future and derailing the Toman, he cannot hold his emotions back and punches him in the face. The other captains approach him, and the one who punches him is Kasuki Baji, who wasn't welcome in Toman's meetings anymore. Baji, enraged, leaves the scene, but not before saying that he will join Valhalla. Takemichi, after waking up from being knocked unconscious by Kisaki, is told by Mikey that he was one of the founders of Toman alongside Baji, Mitsuya, Pachin, and Draken, and that he loves his friend Baji very much, with whom they grew up together, and so he tasks him with the mission to make him return to the gang. Takemichi doesn't stay silent and says that he will only do it if he kicks Kisaki out of the Toman. Mikey agrees, and noticing that Mitsuya was eavesdropping on them, makes Takemichi his new subordinate, and that's how our protagonist officially becomes part of the Toman. After staying alone to clean the blood off of him, Takemichi finds an amulet with a picture of the founding members of the Toman when they were little, recognizing 5 of the commanders except for a 6th member. The next day at school, Yamagishi explains to his group of friends how Toman and Valhalla were formed, and Takemichi understood how important it was with the addition of Kisaki, since he brought 150 members from Mobius to his division in the Toman. Mobius was divided in 2, one part stayed with Kisaki and the other part with Hanma, thus founding Valhalla. However, the real leader of this gang is unknown, and that's why he's called the Headless Angel. The explanation is interrupted by Kazutora Hanamiya, precisely the 3rd captain of Valhalla after Hanma, who takes Takemichi to his lair. After arriving, Takemichi sees Baji cruelly beating his own sub-captain, this being a test to enter in Valhalla. Takemichi worked as a witness to admit that in the last Toman meeting, they were the ones to abandon him. Hanma accepts Baji, and the latter tells Takemichi that Kazutora was the 6th founding member. We see one of the first days of the Toman, where everyone are leaving with fast motorcycles except for Mikey, who had an old Hawk scooter, but he still appreciated it. Baji is ambushed by another gang in the area and went to gas up the Hawk, intending to destroy the scooter, but Baji gets in the way to take the hits quickly, being helped by Mikey, who was no match for the gang. Mikey's birthday was near, and having in mind that the young leader of the Tokyo Manji had an old scooter and wasn't able to buy a new one, they decide to steal a Honda CB250T motorbike, which was Mikey's dream. Kazutora and Baji break into a motorcycle store that they already had in their sights, and when they were about to escape with the motorbike, they are stopped by the shop's owner, who Kazutora kills for having seen their faces. Baji shudders when he recognizes the person lying on the floor. It was Shinichiro, Mikey's older brother. The police arrive and they take Baji away, who in tears apologizes to his recently arrived leader, and Kazutora blames him and vows to take revenge for having forced him to commit murder. Baji was able to avoid going to the correctional because Kazutora spoke in favor of him, and so we learn that Baji was always on his side, and that's why he joined Valhalla, because the both of them were against Mikey. Meanwhile, Hanma tells us what day and place the final battle between Valhalla and Toman will take place. The next day, Shifuya introduces himself to Takemichi as the sub-captain of Baji, who received a beating in Valhalla's lair. He tells him that when Baji hit Takemichi during the last Toman meeting, it saved him from receiving more beatings, and tells him that the former captain who deserted has a plan to expose Kisaki. Takemichi and Shifuya meet up with Draken and Mikey, who were visiting his brother's grave, and the young men tell their leaders what happened with Valhalla. Mikey says that the motorbike they wanted to steal was his brother's treasure, and that he was preparing it as a gift for Mikey, and he will never forgive Kazutora. He starts to lose patience because Takemichi still didn't fulfill his mission, but Takemichi reassures him he will do it, and that one day he will also earn recognition to become the leader of Toman. Chifuyu doesn't believe he can do it by himself, so he offers his help. If Takemichi aids him with the Baji situation, then the two new companions visit Osanai, the old leader of Mobius, to gather intelligence, and he tells them that Kisaki is the one who helped him reach the top of the gang, and that he has always been the one being everything. With this information, they realize that the Headless Angel of Valhalla is none other than Kisaki Teda. With all this info, Takemichi goes back to the present to visit Draken in prison, and the latter reveals that the fight against Valhalla was the first one that Toman ever lost, thus ending under orders Valhalla's control. And also, in that day, Mikey killed Kazutora because he murdered his friend Baji before his very eyes. Kisaki reached the top because he had a scapegoat and kept Mikey from going into prison. Our protagonist goes back to the past with the mission of saving Mike and Baji. He wakes up next to Hina, who gives him a clover collar, just like he did before. Meanwhile, Draken secretly meets up with Kazutora to try and cancel the fight, but to no avail. We see how all the characters are thinking about the upcoming fight, and Takemichi approaches Mikey to apologize for having failed his mission. Now, during their last meeting in the night before the battle, Mikey asks him to not fight against the friend, but instead to get him back on their side. Now, in the battlefield, we can see the leaders of gangs from other areas, because here the debate about who will get to rule over Tokyo will be over. Hansen, leader of the Ikebukuro, criminal black members, would serve as a referee for the fight, but Kazutora easily gets rid of him and starts the fight. We can see how the captains of Toman are no match for the members of Valhalla. Kazutora looks for Mikey so they can fight, but he runs into Draken. Seeing this, Hanma tries to move away so that Kazutora can extract his revenge. Takemichi does nothing more than run around and receive beatings, being saved more than once by his captain Mitsuya and his new partner Chifuyu. Feeling that he's useless, he tries to fight against multiple enemies at the same time, but he passes out while giving his all, and thus inspires Draken and the Toman to keep fighting. Kazutora corners Mikey along with Chanbo and Chom, two partners from Kazutora's correctional. The leader of Toman loses consciousness for a few seconds, but because he's stronger, he gets rid of all three of them at the same time. But he sits down on the floor due to his injuries. The captains of Toman are surrounded by several enemies at the same time, and they can't reach Mikey, who is lying on a car scrap pile. The only one who is available and appears to save him is Kisaki. Baji was waiting for this moment, and instantly he lunges at Kisaki, only to then be stopped by Chifuyu and Takemichi. But the latter loses sight of Kazutora for a moment, forgetting that he was the one who killed Baji. And while he's being grabbed by our protagonist, he's stabbed in the back by him. Baji shows he's extremely strong by getting rid of all of Kisaki's men on top of him. But after reaching their boss, he falls defeated to the floor due to the knife that was stuck in him. Mikey, encouraged by Kisaki, wakes up and, in his rage, defeats Hanma and beats Kazutora to near death. At this moment, Baji, who everyone thought was dead, gets up and stops the leader of Toman, but then he gets closer to Kazutora. The latter takes a knife out of his pocket and stabs himself, so he doesn't feel guilty for having killed his friend. With his last breath, Baji tells the only ones who knew the truth, Takemichi and Chifuyu, to take care of Mikey and that Kasaki is the real enemy, occupying Pachin's post to the Toman. Baji, just like Mikey, sees that Takemichi is like his older brother and reveals that his greatest treasure always were his friends, the founders of Toman, Mikey, Draken, Mitsuya, Pachin, and Kazutora. Mikey beats Kazutora again, but Takemichi gets in the way and drops the amulet he found during the last Toman meeting. He belonged to Baji, who kept it after they all brought it together in the temple where the Toman meets, since he was the one who proposed the initial idea of getting a gang with his friends. While they are all crying, they can hear that the police is on the way, and everyone flees the scene except for Kazutora, who apologizes to Mikey and accepts all of the blame, staying with Baji's body and getting arrested. The battle was called the Bloody Halloween. 2 weeks later, we see how Chifuyu approaches Baji's tomb to share the food he promised to him when he died, and we learn how they met. Chifuyu was a high school student that was respected by everyone, while Baji, who was about to repeat grade, studied as to not make his mother cry. After noticing that a big guy like Baji was hogging all of the attention, Chifuyu approaches him, but instead of giving him a lesson, he helps him with his homework. Being a tough guy that messed with everyone, Chifuyu is ambushed by a whole gang and he defends himself pretty well, but in his hour of need, Baji appears to help him, who was now a captain of Toman. Takemichi and Draken visit Kazutora at the correctional, the latter telling them that Mikey forgives him and that he will always be a part of Toman, thus giving him the strength to not take his own life due to his actions. Draken invites Takemichi to his house and thanks for him stopping Mikey from killing Kazutora. He notices that in his room he has pictures of all the people he loves, including Baji and Emma. On the way back home, Takemichi comes across Hina and Naoto, and they misunderstand that Emma was cheating on Draken with Mikey, but actually they were siblings and spending the day together because it was her birthday. Mitsuya summons Pain and Takemichi to his high school, revealing that he's the president of the sewing club in order to fix his uniform's jacket for the new Toman meeting, where he can finally use it for the first time. Mikey arrives at the meeting along with Hanma, who, thanks to Kisaki, decides to join the Toman along with 300 of his men from Valhalla, thus leaving Toman with about 450 men. On the other hand, Mikey lets Chifuyu have the honor of taking Takemichi, the new captain of the squad that was led by Baji. Takemichi thanks him and cries, feeling satisfied with his progress. Then he heads to Naoto's house to go back to the present and wakes up in the video rental store where he worked right in front of his boss. But in this occasion, he was a client. Our protagonist realizes that this time he was able to change his present, living a luxurious life alongside his high school friends, and Chifuyu being a high command of the Toman. In an administrative meeting, we see how several of the captains are still part of the gang, like Pachin, Pain, Yashiro, Nahoya, and Hanma, but there are 3 new members who apparently used to be part of the Black Dragon. The meeting was set up to talk about a traitor in the organization, and right at that moment, Kisaki arrives, who everyone shows respect, and he takes Takemichi to Chifuyu. Now that the 3 of them are alone, he admits to having planned the Bloody Halloween using Hanma to convince Kazutora to stab Baji and found Valhalla. Kisaki apologizes and they toast in honor of Baji, but both Takemichi and Chifuyu pass out due to the liquid they drank, and thus Kisaki shows his true face. After a while, they wake up and find themselves tied up, and Kisaki accuses them of being traitors. Takemichi, who doesn't understand anything because he doesn't have the memories of the life he lived, is shot in the leg, and Chifuyu reveals himself as the real traitor, but all he wanted was to get rid of Kisaki. With his last words, Chifuyu tells Takemichi that Mikey disappeared, Draken was executed, and that he committed many mistakes, but they never stopped being themselves, following the will of Baji and the original Toman, thus leaving everything in his hands, and Kisaki shoots him dead. Kisaki, now aiming at Takemichi's head, lets a tear fall and says goodbye to his hero, and the scene cuts to the sound of a bullet being fired. With this amazing ending, that leaves us craving for more. We expect a lot from the next season that was just premiered. Among them, to see how Takemichi will get free from this situation, what happened to Mikey, and if Takemichi will be able to stop Kisaki's plans to save his beloved and his friends.